week is coming from the prophet of Jeremiah. I know there's no shock that Dominique is not preaching the gospel. Jeremiah chapter 17. And I'd like to emphasize verses 7 and 8, which reads this way. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heats come. It does not always turn. It is always green. It has no worries in the year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. What I tagged this moment tonight in our celebration this semester thus far, and I know the work that we will continue to do, will be putting the pieces together. We celebrate Anna Julia Cooper, a woman who is an incredible individual who has shown us not just the working and teachings of Jesus Christ, but because we need to make sure we know who we're talking about, here's a little history. Anna Julia Cooper, born August 10th, 1858, died on February 27th, 1964, was an American author, educator, sociologist, speaker, Black liberation activist, Black feminist leader, and one of the most prominent African-American scholars in the United States history. Born into slavery in 1858, Cooper received a world-class education which enabled her to claim power and prestige in academic and social circles. In 1924, she received her PhD from Sorbonne University of Paris. Cooper became the fourth African-American woman to earn a PhD in the United States of America. She was also a prominent member of Washington, D.C.'s African-American community and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Everybody's allowed one bad mistake. Cooper made contributions to social science fields, particularly in sociology. Her first book, A Voice from the South, by a Black woman of the South, is widely acknowledged as the first articulations of Black feminism, giving Cooper the often used title of the mother of Black feminism. Annie Julia Cooper was born into slavery in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1858. She and her mother, Hannah Stanley Hayward, were enslaved by George Washington Hayward, one of the sons of North Carolina's longest-serving state treasurer, John Hayward, who helped found the University of North Carolina, but whose estate later was forced to repay missing funds. Either George, who enslaved her mother, or his brother, Dr. Fabius Hayward, who enslaved her older brother, Andrew, was probably her father. Anna's mother refused to clarify paternity because we know how that goes and the way life is unfolded. George became first state attorney for Wake County, North Carolina, and together with his brother owned a plantation in which Cooper worked. Cooper worked as a domestic servant in the Hayward home. And on February 27, 1964, Cooper died in Washington, D.C. at the age of 105 as a result of a heart attack. Her memorial was held in chapel on the campus of St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina, where her academic journey began. And she was buried alongside her husband. Anna Julia Cooper is the only African-American woman to be quoted in the U.S. passport. I want to be clear about this terminology I'm about to offer you, this word, this phraseology that is accustomed to say that she wrote this or penned this, because this, for me, becomes a pivotal component of a sacred text that is combined with the scriptures in which we're talking about for proclamation. On pages 24 and 25 of the 2016 passport, being the only African-American woman quoted in the U.S. passport, a document used to cross borders and boundaries and travel, despite the childhood trauma of being born into slavery and then potentially used as a slave who could have been by one, her father, she wrote, "The cause of freedom is not the cause of a race or a sect, a party or a class. It is the cause of humankind, the very birthright of humanity." Putting the pieces together. A piece is a portion or an object or a material produced by cutting, tearing, or breaking the whole. A bit, a section, a slice, a chunk, a segment, a lump, a hunk, a wedge, a slab, a knob, a block, a cake, a bar, a tablet, thank you, a brick, a cube, stick, length, a portion, a particle, a fragment, flake, silver, splinter, chip, wafer, crumb, grain, speck, scrap, remnant, shred, shard, snippet, mite, mouthful, morsel, broken wood in bits and shattered, smashed and smithereens, and yet we're putting them all together again. So putting the pieces together is a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of difficult work. It is cutting apart what once was whole, but recognizing that that whole piece might not have been the healthiest thing. To put the pieces together again takes reflection, hard work. It's a singular act of holding up a mirror to see in ways that you contribute to a piece, a system that was harmful, to say, I don't want to be a part of that anymore, so I'll do some breaking, some tearing to become a piece that God is calling me to be, so that when we come back together as a tapestry, a mosaic, that this is now a new tapestry that God has created. Putting the pieces back together again means at times pieces will be missing. Pieces don't always fit together. At times, putting pieces back together again means that the edges might not be as smooth as they used to be. They might be a little rough. It requires difficult conversations, reflections on the way you contributed to problems, and ways to understand how you can become a part of the resolve. Putting the pieces together again is not an overnight task or job. It's the work that this school, this institution, this community, those who believe in God in this place are doing every single day. It is not a work that is perfect. It is the work that requires forgiveness, accountability, apologies, questions, answers, and time to think and sit with what has been done. So the work of putting the pieces back together again here at the Seminary of the Southwest requires exactly what Jeremiah says. It means to trust in the Lord. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him, meaning you can't do it by yourself and in your own might. Meaning no matter how educated you are, how experienced you've been, you can't do it on your own. Meaning that we have to trust that God has anointed each and every one of us to be able to do the task and the work, and knowing that you can't do it all by yourself. It requires collaborative currency, which means then the puzzle being put back together again requires joint efforts. Many of us putting our hands to the plow. We know what it means to be a puzzle, to be something that requires to put some things together. A puzzle is defined as a game, a toy, or a problem designed to test ingenuity and or knowledge. So we're putting back the puzzle of a community who've had some difficult things in the past. As a matter of fact, not too much of a far past. We're putting back the pieces together to become the community that God called us to be in the book of Acts. All in an upper room, speaking various languages, but with one heart to serve the Lord. We're putting the pieces back together again to be able to look each other in the face and see the humanity of who we are, despite where we end or land on political spectrums, theological convictions, childhood and backgrounds, educational status, economic background, different substance abuse and educational components and family dynamics, single family households, adopted, fostered, or all isolated. We're putting back those pieces. Those pieces require us to trust in God, but it also requires us to be rooted, because the text tells us that they will be like a tree planted by the water. And I want you to know that there's good news in that, because to be a tree planted by God means that your roots are deep and you're going nowhere despite how hard the seasons are. And to be planted by water means you will be nourished even when you don't know how it will happen. I came to encourage somebody in the midst of the semester who's wondering how they're going to make it. God has planted you like a tree by the water, and the nourishment is on the way, because your roots are deep enough to reach the nourishment of the water that is beneath the land that no one can see. So when it doesn't look like it's going to work out, I want you to know that God is already working it out. Verse 8 tells us they will be like a tree planted by the water that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear the heat that comes. We know folk will have stuff to say about what we're doing. We know people will misunderstand. We know people will have questions. We know people will judge, but we don't fear the heat, because we trust in the God that planted us. It says then that there will be no worries in the year of drought. So even when we can't find the water, that our roots are close enough to the stream, because that's where God has placed us. And we talk about heat in the state of Texas. It's good to know that God's hand is on our life. And this is the blessed good news. It never fails to bear fruit. So even when it doesn't look like change is happening, even when it doesn't look like progress is moving, we never fail to bear fruit, because we're in the hands of God. We've been planted where God has planted us. I know some of you are wondering, how in the world did you wind up at the Seminary of the Southwest? You've been planted here by God, close enough to a stream that you can't see and or identify. Many times when you can't see provision, God is already making a way. So we're putting the pieces of the puzzle back together, but we're not doing it individually. We're doing it together. And in order to do that, it takes trust. It takes rootedness. It takes vulnerability, transparency, forgiveness, accountability, but lastly, resilience. And this, my brothers and my sisters, I take with great pride, being able to tell you, I know there's one thing that's true about my people as we celebrate Black History Month, is that we are a resilient people, that despite the history that people tell, that we knew a God well before we made it to these supposed United States of America, that we called on the name of Yahweh in our motherland, and we called on that same name in the bottom of boats moving through the Middle Passage. We called on that name of Yahweh and Jesus even in these lands in the midst of Jim Crowism and in the midst of plantations. We called on that name in the midst of civil rights movement and even in the midst of Black Lives Matter movement. And so now you got some of us around here to show you what resilience really looks like when you find yourself wavering and trying to figure it out. If you want to know how you're going to make it, look at one of your good black brothers and sisters around here to say, I see that you've made it in the midst of all the hell and high water your family, your ancestors have gone through. And if you can make it, surely I can make it, because I can tell you now, standing here in front of you, I am a living witness that God is still in control, that when things look tough, God is working it out. I know we serve a God who still sits high and still looks low. And so we're putting the pieces back together again, one piece at a time. Even when the piece is jagged and rough, we're putting it back. Even when the piece is lost and we're looking to find it, we're putting it back. Even when the full puzzle is incomplete, we're putting it back. And this is why I believe my ancestors were saying, I will trust in the Lord. I will trust in the Lord. I will trust in the Lord until I die. And my brothers and sisters, as we continue to put the pieces back together again, as long as we trust in the Lord, then together, each and every one of us, despite our racial, ethnic background, can claim together that we are anointed and called, healed and loved, successful and at peace, stable and joyous, strong and educated, delivered and restored, whole and well, faithful and determined, supported and free, employed and blessed, educated and chosen. And together, the tapestry, the mosaic, the stained glass window of justice and love will be put back together again. And we're going to do it one piece at a time. Amen.